Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
And I've shared with men and all of our events that I didn't become a man until I was 47 years old. I was a boy. I made babies, made millions, was successful in so many worldly ways, but I was childish and selfish, and my choices were all about me until God had enough of me. I finally ran to the end of myself.
I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. Get ready for some great inspiration for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the marriage that you're nurturing, and the faith walk you're walking, right here on the AllMomDoes podcast. All right, you're going to want to buckle up for this episode of the AllMomDoes podcast. I'm Julie Lyles Carr. We're part of the Purposely Podcast Network. We are going to be talking about marriage, and not just the airbrushed, filtered, romantic with the soundtrack underneath kind of marriage. We're going to be talking about some of the real stuff today. So if you are someone who has a little one in the back of the car while you're waiting in the school drop-off line, or you've got this playing in the kitchen while you're working on getting the kitchen cleaned up after dinner, you might want to put on some headphones because we're going to be very direct and very real today. So here's your chance to do that. I am thrilled to welcome to the podcast Tim and Kathy Bush. They have done some amazing things in their career, and you may be familiar with them because they are part of the Family Life Group. They help do conferences across the U.S. with their different topics on marriage. And they also are very honest and very transparent about what their journey in marriage has been. They've been married for over 40 years. They've got 3 kiddos and in-laws and grandbabies and the whole thing. Tim and Kathy, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us, Julie.
Absolutely. Well, we are thrilled to have you. Now, I gave the listener a little warning up at the top because you have a new book out and it's just so direct and right to the heart. I love it. The title of the book is Sex on the First Date. And you dive right into all of the things that you guys did from a very different perspective than what we usually hear about when we talk about a marriage that now definitely identifies itself as a Christian, God-saved, redemptive story. So take me back to when the relationship started. Tim, let's start with you. When did you first meet Kathy?
Well, I met her actually at a track meet. My little brother was at the same middle school I went with Cal's sister, and Cal was there. And I saw her, and I was actually pretty amazed on how good looking she was, and still am actually, but I'm amazed every day that I get to be married to her. But that back then, it was all about looks, and I wanted to get to know her, and I didn't even talk to her really at that event at all, but that's where I saw her. And my brother made it really clear that she was a church girl. I was not good enough for her, and that with my reputation and how I was with women, that I should definitely not even think about taking her out. So that's how.
And yet, I'm guessing that you asked at some point, because here we are a long time later. Kathy, for you, when you first met Tim, he said that you were raised as a church girl. So what was it in that early dating relationship? Because you both say it just went sideways real fast. What was it in that early dating relationship that even though you'd had this other kind of upbringing, drew you to Tim and into some of the challenge and drama that you guys got into so quickly?
Well, when Tim describes me as a church girl, what that meant and what his brother saw in the family was that we went to church on Sundays. So for me, being a church girl really was just about going to church on Sundays. It really wasn't. I mean, I know I got a good foundation from that, but it didn't really affect my Monday through Saturday days. It was pretty much just on Sundays. So it really didn't. I mean, that's what Tim saw because I just went to church. So that's pretty much what it was it was a Sunday church girl.
Right.
And I think his brother thought, that I was such a good girl, but he didn't really know anything about me. Tim and I really, in those years, were kind of doing the same thing with drinking and dating a lot of people. And And we kind of came into the relationship the same way.
Right. Y'all have been very honest that in this early dating relationship, boom, Kathy, you turned up pregnant. So Tim, what was that like when you got the news that this girl that you'd been dating, and it doesn't sound like you guys had been living a lifestyle which was, wow, I sure am in a position in my life where I want to find the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with and build on a foundation. Doesn't sound like that's the season of life y'all were in when this happened. What did you think when you first discovered that Kathy was expecting?
Well, first off, it was unexpected. I mean, we'd only been dating for 3 months, and when I first found out, I had got another girl pregnant in my promiscuity when I was 16, and that didn't turn out well. I paid for an abortion, which I didn't find out till 40 years later, or 30 years later, that was going to affect me in a really negative way. I thought I did the right thing at the time, but when Kat told me she was pregnant, I literally thought, and going back to our first date, that night I told my roommate, this is the girl I'm going to marry. Mm-hmm. But then the night when she told me she was pregnant, I literally kind of thought to myself, I want to marry this girl, but this is 10 years early for me. But more than anything, I want this kid to have a name. I didn't want to make the mistake I made before. So I think out of duty, I felt that's what I needed to do. I didn't really know. I mean, I thought I knew what love was, and I thought I loved her, but I loved more of her looks and what I thought I could live with because of how she looked, how she felt, how she smelled, all those things. I just didn't have anything else that was really driving that relationship.
You know, I think we're still seeing a lot of that. You would think we would have progressed a lot in the following decades when it comes to how we evaluate. And there's no denying that chemistry and being drawn to someone is important. That is not something that is out there and not spiritual enough. There are reasons that God designed us to have these people that we're drawn to, people we're not. I mean, none of that's bad. But I am amazed that we still seem to immediately evaluate what we think could be the success or failure of a relationship based purely on that initial attraction. We don't often get much deeper than that. And I hope we're going to be getting to do a better job with that in coming generations, but we still seem to be really stuck there. When I look at the success of shows like Love is Blind, you can see a secular attempt to say, what does it mean to try to get to know someone without being distracted by the physicality first? Is there actually something really there? But what we also are finding on the other side of that show is that these things aren't lasting. That we put this in kind of this really interesting incubator of heightened emotion and heightened expectation. And what comes out the other side isn't always anything any more stable than those who are just drawn to each other and get involved as y'all did based initially on that attraction. Kathy, y'all talk about that you had both in your backgrounds, issues and baggage that made coming into this marriage from such an early place, 3 months in, to just all of a sudden, boom, be into the middle of family life. What were some of the things that you began to understand through the years that you had brought into the marriage in terms of that kind of generational stuff that we all have?
Well, first I want to go back, Julie, when you were talking about, not really even being in a season that you were ready to get married, it was a lot different for me because I was 17 when I met Tim, and my thought was after I graduated from high school, I was going to find a man. So it was really on my radar that I was going to find a man. And what really attracted me to Tim was that he seemed like a man to me. I had dated boys in high school. Well, Tim had a job and he had cars and he had a house and he seemed really responsible. So he really checked those boxes for me because I was looking for what I kind of saw in my parents. And I thought this guy could take care of me and provide for me. And, I wanted to be a mom and stay home and raise kids. And he seemed like a great guy that I could do that with. So my attraction was kind of looking at what I was raised with and looking to Tim to think that he would fit that. And so, but what going back to, my childhood, and yeah, I definitely brought baggage in, which started when I was young. I was a super shy kid and we moved around a lot. So it was really hard for me to make friends. And then As a child, I was molested, and that turned into me being very promiscuous and turning to alcohol, and which played into my dating life, which played into kind of sleeping around with guys. But I really eventually thought that I'm going to find a man to marry me. And so Tim was a big draw to me for that. And, he had a lot of different baggage than I did. But it's interesting because the short time that we dated, we didn't know any of these things about each other. And like you said, you think that people are going to get this more right. But what I was looking at when we were dating was how Tim was making me feel. And those feelings, as Tim said, he was looking at how I made him feel. But those feelings, yeah, like you said, those things aren't going to last. That's not a foundation to build on, because feelings come and go. And until you find that lasting thing, which we finally did in a marriage, it's not going to work. It's not going to last.
I love that you bring this up, because that headspace that you were in saying, no, I think I am hitting the right season of life for this to start. I had this model that's kind of how my parents did it. And my husband and I met at a Christian university. And I can tell you that while I think it's great for people to go somewhere where they're involved in a community and they are actually dating people who are supposed to be there for some of the same reasons, I think that can be a wonderful thing. But there was definitely a sense that the pressure cooker turned on at a certain point, say junior, senior year, because we were all getting ready to launch into careers and into the real world. And so there was definitely an uptick in relationships getting more serious, engagements beginning, because it all looked like it was the right time for these things to happen and sort of in the right place for these things to happen. And yet that is simply not enough in any way, shape, or form to guarantee that there's going to be success, that you're really built on something that can go the distance. And through the years, that's played out. There have been different things that have happened, and I don't think anybody was prepared for some of the challenges and the interpersonal interactions and the things that can happen deeper into a marriage, even when you think you're starting it in the right season of life, or that you've met the person from doing all the right things, or being involved in this church group or doing that, or going to this kind of university. Tim, for you, when did you realize, once y'all got married, that this was going to be a lot harder and there were going to be a lot more challenges than maybe you thought when you looked at marriage from that early place?
Well, because of my baggage, which was so different than Cass, I would tell you, I thought the challenges were going to be on the wedding night. I literally thought I shouldn't have done this. I was in no way ready for it. Kath wasn't as much fun anymore. She was pregnant now. I really felt like I'd made a mistake on the wedding night. So I guess that's the short answer. But
yeah,
that's what you asked when. That's when I saw the challenges start, was on the wedding night.
Right. And over the years, y'all have been very direct in saying it escalated. The career was going well, Tim, but that also meant with more resources, there was also more opportunity to step out of the marriage. And Kathy, you've been really clear too, that all kinds of different things began to intersect your lives, even as you had 2 more kids, even as you were trying to provide a place of stability for those kids foundationally. Kathy, for you, when was the first time that you went, wow, the wheels are really off. I don't think I can stay in this thing?
Well, as Tim said, he kind of thought on our wedding night, I wondered on our wedding night what I had done, because all of a sudden this fun relationship that we had wasn't fun anymore. But really, because I was pregnant and then became, I had 3 kids before I was 21. So I was really entranced with taking care of the kids and being a mom. And I really think it was at the point when our kids got a little bit older and I kind of finally got some space in there to start thinking about myself. And when Tim and we started into partying together, and then I was around other people, around other men, and really, I was really kind of sheltered with being home with the kids, and that was what I was doing. Tim was working all the time, and I was taking care of everything at home. But once they were older and that space started happening, I really started questioning, did I marry the right person? That was a big thought of mine a lot of the time. And then when other men came along that showed me attention and made me feel good because I wasn't getting it at home, I definitely was thinking, man, I married the wrong person. I really doubted that we would stay married long term.
You both said that for some reason, you both had times that you were like, I'm walking, I'm out. And yet it never happened at the same time. One of you would be in a position of saying, I really still want to fight for this. And the other one saying, I think I'm out. How did that rhythm, long did that last before you both got on page and said, okay, this is something we actually both want to fight for? Because I could have seen a day coming where both of y'all would have said, okay, it's lining up, we're both out. So how long did that season last where things were up and down? You just never happened to be on the same page at the same time about ending it.
Well, that was 27 years of that. And
wow.
That was, we had got all the kids raised, and we really hit a rock bottom in our marriage to the point where there was a lot of the time, I would say the majority of the time, I would talk about divorce. I would kind of threaten divorce. Tim went through so many divorces as a kid. He always said, we're not going to do that to our kids. But when he finally hit the point that he was done with the marriage and we were kind of at rock bottom, we actually sat down and talked to each other and said, we need to either end this marriage or we need to figure out how to be married and have a good marriage. And so when we kind of had that kind of come to Jesus talk and committed to...
With no Jesus.
Yeah, with no Jesus. That's when we committed to long-term counseling, and that we were going to figure out how to be married. And that was at the 27-year mark.
And for me, that part too, with the big moment was, I thought we better get a divorce because it just wasn't working. And we start in chapter 1 in the book at our lowest point, which is called Caught. That's at the 27-year mark. And good job by reading the book, because that's where we started in this book, and then went back to our childhoods. But I can tell you, when I thought it was time to call it quits, I actually felt like God was just getting back at me for all the things I had done and not told Kat. And I thought, I might as well just start over, because there's no way I'm ever going to tell anybody or tell Kat all the things I did, because I was told by somebody I really respected, you take these things to the grave and you don't carry them with you. So and that happened. I finally told her a little bit later, a couple years later, but at that point I thought God was getting back at me. And so that I thought, let's just start over. I'll do a reset with somebody else.
Yeah. Just do a reset. And so often, even within our Christian circles, there comes a point in some marriages where things have become so toxic, there's so much history, there's so much hurt, there's so much baggage, that there are those who say, just cut clean and start over. But y'all's story has a different chapter. So you hit this rock bottom, and then when did you feel like all of a sudden you began to really incorporate a message of hope, that you began to really incorporate that Jesus could redeem this whole situation, something that statistically was not redeemable? When did that happen for y'all, Kathy?
Well, I want to say too, I think when we had that rock bottom, that was at 25 years.
That's right.
That was at 25 years, because that's when we started the 2 years of counseling. Tim continued in counseling throughout those 2 years. We're kind of working through, I thought we were working through everything that we had been dealing with in our marriage. I had no idea that Tim still was not telling me everything.
I gave her bits and pieces.
Yeah, he gave me little bits and pieces, but we weren't, so I felt like I actually got to a place where I said, I think I'm done with counseling. I think, we're in a really good place. But then what happened for Tim was God just really took him to the bottom. He started suffering anxiety through a series of deaths in the family.
I was took to my knees.
Tim was really, and then there was a financial crisis, and Tim started suffering anxiety. So all those years, one of the things in our marriage that was a big problem was that Tim was so controlling. And so during this period of him suffering anxiety, the control that he had in that he was holding, that I always kind of felt like he was holding over me, started to go away, like he had no control. So the shift in our marriage was all of a sudden I'm kind of having to care for him and step up and take care of him. He was running businesses. Our kids were partners. I had to talk to the kids about dad not being able to work. So there was all of a sudden this shift, and Tim is continuing counseling, and his counselor is trying to find out what's going on. There's something you're not telling me.
And I actually thought it was because of the abuse from one of my stepdads. I thought that was the problem, and he helped me through that. But ultimately, once he walked me through that, he said, I know there's something else you're not telling me.
There's something more, yeah.
And so when I told him, well, there is some infidelity I haven't told you about with Kat. And I told him, and this was a lot. And he said, well, that's what it is. You need to tell Kat. And I said, well, I'll lose her if I tell her. And he said, well, if you don't tell her, you're going to lose your life. Because you were literally, I was so disabled. I was to the point where scriptures say every knee will bow, my knees were bowed. I had nothing to give. I even contemplated suicide. So I was that bad. I was to the point where I was drinking a fifth of booze a day and taking Xanax and other drugs, both prescription and non-prescription. I was a total mess. And Kat cared for me. I mean, totally cared for me. And then when I did tell her finally everything, she was receptive, but she wasn't, I couldn't hug her or anything right away. She wasn't willing to just forgive me immediately, but she said she wasn't going to go anywhere. And then a little while later, she was told by a family member that maybe she should leave me, because I was pretty sick at that point. And she told that family member she wasn't going to leave. And she actually came up and told me, no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. If we lose everything, I'm sticking with you. And I look back at that, Julie, and I really do believe that's the first time I ever saw Jesus was through Kat. But I didn't know it then. I didn't know it then.
It's probably one of the number one questions I get being a mom of 8 kids. And that question is, what on earth are y'all doing about college? And I can tell you, with 8 different kids, 8 different learning styles, 8 different ideas about what the kids want when it comes to their careers and all of the rest, college has been a big topic of conversation around here. Well, there is a university that I want you to know about because it just hits so many of the things that are really important when it comes to considering your kid's college education. George Fox University, it's the #1 private school in Oregon. It's a Christian university. It's located in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. And what's so great is, in addition to a top-notch education, students have the opportunity to grow and deepen their faith, and they can learn in this really pivotal time in their lives who God made them to be. I mean, let's face it. We need more people coming out of our universities who know how to be leaders and how to be leaders with character. And George Fox University offers more than 60 academic majors. And that includes a nationally recognized engineering program, a nursing program. It allows your student to pursue their passions and prepare for the calling that God has for them. And let's not forget about fun when it comes to college. George Fox University students have a great student life. There are weekly campus events, there's chapel, there's service opportunities. There are 23 NCAA Division III athletic teams. Here's something that is important to me. There's a study abroad opportunity. So if your student wants to go and experience life somewhere else for a semester, they can do that. There's outdoor recreation because, of course, we're talking about Oregon, so gorgeous. George Fox University could be just the perfect fit for your student as you are looking into college, career, and all that goes beyond. George Fox University, where your student will learn and thrive in the center of it all. Kathy, how do you think that you had the wherewithal to extend that kind of mercy and grace in a situation like that, particularly when you were acting as caregiver as well? I mean, in terms of talking about an emotional, bank account being completely depleted by this point, where do you think you got the wherewithal to be able to function in that way?
I feel like at that point of our marriage, when Tim was telling me everything that had gone on, I felt like really that our marriage was starting to make sense. All those years that I kind of questioned things that were happening, and there really wasn't any part of me that I felt like I needed to leave. I felt like as he told me these things, And as I processed it, I actually thought, you know what, we're finally at a place in our marriage where everything is out. There's no secrets, and we can finally start healing. And so it was almost through that process and working through those things, talking about things, I really felt like for the first time we could really truly be honest with each other. And I didn't, there really wasn't a question that I as Tim said, I wasn't going to go anywhere. And I don't know if that was a supernatural thing going on in me but it wasn't, I didn't react in a way like I'm done with this. I just really thought that, we can build on this. We're at the bottom. Now we can finally start building. And so
that's an amazing way to look at the level of honesty that you guys got to. For a lot of couples, when that level of honesty happens, that's the end. It's so unique to hear someone say, oh, okay, now it's really all out there. Now we can begin. I think that's really going to bring some hope to someone today, that could be a possibility.
Well, and I think too, Julie, whether couples get to that level of honesty or there's things that they're just not telling. And like we talked about, people will just get out of the marriage because that'll be easier. But that whatever they're carrying, they're going to carry into their next relationship. And it's always going to be something that is going to be there until you get it out. So it's like, what have you got to lose? Like Tim said, his counselor said, this is going to kill you. And, whether he kept it in or told me, it was either going to destroy him or destroy the relationship. But luckily, yeah, it was really the start of a true beginning for us.
And as I share in the book, and I've shared with men and at all of our events, that I didn't become a man until I was 47 years old. I was a boy. I made babies, made millions, was successful in so many worldly ways, but I was childish and selfish, and my choices were all about me until God had enough of me. And I finally ran to the end of myself.
Yeah. Such a beautiful and really, wow, heart moment to hear someone say that, that this is how I was operating to this point. And I think it takes a real man. I think it takes a real woman to be able to admit, man, I was childish up to this point in my life, even though I was doing all the things that the world would say are evidence of great #adulting. These were the relationships I was destroying along the way. We had Jill Savage on a while back where she talked about the fight for her marriage following infidelity. I'll have Rebecca put that link to that episode in the show notes, because she and her husband had a different path in the way that they were dealing with things. But on the other side of it, the healing story that they tell and what they now are able to do is so powerful and so reminiscent of what y'all are saying. I want to turn, because I know I have the listener who's saying, my marriage is in a mess. And yeah, I'm hearing what they're saying and I'm resonating with the mess of it. But I love that you are able to look back now and reflect on a long period of marriage where things weren't working. And now you've had some years on the other side to go, okay, now we do have some things that we know work. One of the things that you outlined that I thought was really interesting, and I think it lives in the hearts, particularly of a lot of women. And so, Kathy, I'm going to ask you this. What is that drive that we have to try to fix our spouse? And I know that guys can have the same thing. I'm not saying that guys don't want to fix their wives, but I do hear a lot from women. If he would just A, B, C, D, E, then the marriage would be okay. How do you help couples navigate through that posture, through that mindset, Kathy?
I think both of us would probably answer this the same way, because we hear from so many different couples, yeah, my husband's doing this, my wife's doing this. Ultimately, you have to look at yourself. You have to work on yourself and make the change in you, because we're not going to change our spouse. Well, I believe only Jesus Christ can change our spouse. We're not going to change our spouse, but the change may come by the change you're making in yourself. And I didn't know that. I mean, I think it was more on our side. Tim was trying to fix me. It was a constant, we went to counselors for years because Tim was trying to fix me. And constantly the counselors were asking me, like, Kathy, what do you want? but I just didn't even know what I wanted. I wanted to be happy. That was the main thing. Like, what did that even mean? And now it's not a matter of, I mean, our happiness is not the main goal in life. Happiness is going to come and go. The joy that comes from knowing the Lord is that stable joy. And I mean, because we tried everything. And not only you've heard a lot of the bad things that we tried, but we tried good things. I mean, we went to a lot of self-help seminars, went to the Gottman Institute. You know, we were always wanting things to be better in our marriage, and we wanted to be better, but we weren't looking to who created us to make us better. That was what was missing. We were looking to what the world was saying. You know, you need to find yourself and figure out yourself. And the thing is, what does that even mean? You know, there's no answer in that. But that was the answer, was when we turned to God's word and started reading God's word and God's plan for us and his handbook on life. That was when we started. We started in the Proverbs. That was recommended. A really good friend of Tim's, when Tim was at his lowest, Tim was asking this friend for drugs, and he said, "Tim, have you tried reading the Bible?" Well, at this point, Tim had bought a Bible. He was desperately flipping through the pages, trying to find answers as he was drinking. And his friend said, "Tim, you need to slow down. Why don't you start in the Proverbs? There's 31 of them. Read one a day, a chapter a day." And he said that's where he started. And a couple weeks later, Tim came to me and asked me if I would read the Bible with him. And I tell guys, like, this is the sexiest thing that my husband had ever done.
Right,
to ask me to read the Bible. And that was when things started to change, when we turned to the Bible and started reading what God had to say about us and our lives and his plan for us. That's when things changed. Right. So I don't know. I kind of went off the rails of what you were asking me about.
No, I love that when that shift comes and understanding your responsibility in it, and those changes can only come through our relationship with God. Now, I'm a big proponent, and part of my degree path is in a lot of these things when it comes to things like Gottman Institute. I think they're amazing, and, you know, things about attachment theory, all that. I think all of that, those are great. Those are fantastic tools. And it is so difficult to create change in yourself without understanding who the Creator created you to be and seeking his help in order to do that. Because when we're having to lean completely on our own capacity and our own humanness, the next time our spouse does something that makes us wild, the first place we usually go is back into our own self-serving modality and our own ability to point out what's wrong in someone else. It's why Jesus says, hey, you have to get the log out of your own eye before you worry about the speck of dust with someone else. Those are not always the perspectives or the approaches that we see in some of the tools and things that we have when it comes to working on marriage. And so I love that you bring this up, that it was this beautiful foundational place of coming into faith together and then having these great tools around you. I mean, I think that's fantastic, but I love that you distinguish that. What do you think now, looking back, because you said that essentially when this all really hit some rough stuff was basically once the kids were raised. And I can imagine a listener saying, man, my spouse and I are really struggling, and I know it's got to be having an impact on our children. What do we do about this? How do we continue to conduct the marriage? Should we conduct the marriage in front of the kids? What's going to happen to the kids? How is it going to launch them? Tim, what has been your experience with your kids on the other side of this, since their primary raising years were in the thick of some of the challenge here?
Well, that's a great question. And we had to ask for a lot of forgiveness because we missed a lot. And they told us not to beat us up so much. We put videos. Well, first off, we put call-out boxes in this book from our kids. So they actually share where they were at while we did these things. They actually share about it and how it affected them. And then in the videos, they also talk about it. But I can tell you what we did and what they say we did was it changed everything for them, because they didn't jump in right away and say we're up for the change, because we taught them some really bad things too, especially me with my boys. But ultimately, they embraced the change. And now it's literally changed the next generation, which is our grandkids. Our grandkids only know us how we are now.
Right.
So it's a generational thing. In fact, in one of the videos, TJ says, I think by the choices my parents made, they've changed generational sin in our family. So when you have the ability and your legacy is important to you to change things now, put your stake in the ground for some things, which is chapter 20, all about stakes in the ground, that you have the ability to change generations that maybe are even yet to come. And with obviously with the Lord's help, but the things that you do matter, because our grandkids are going to have grandkids someday. We're not going to know those grandkids of theirs, but what we did today mattered. And so talking to our kids and having those conversations, saying we were sorry, and still connecting with them today and loving them in a different way, in a Christ-centered way, and teaching them, us praying together every day. They see that. They know we do that. They know we're in God's Word every day. We didn't talk about prayer, but it's a daily non-negotiable for us. But we didn't do that until about 12 years ago. So I'm 62 and Kath is 60. So we didn't do that till about 12 years ago. We never prayed ever except for the meal prayer. And we're finding out that most couples don't. With that prayer, we hear each other's hearts when we pray. We invite the Holy Spirit into our marriage every day. It's just a non-negotiable in our marriage, a stake in the ground thing that we're modeling to our kids and grandkids. And we hope that someday they remember that and they bring it into their marriage. That's what our hope is.
And I think that brings, I think that brings such hope to the listener who's saying, I'm worried that my spouse and I have created to this point something that our kids are going to carry forward, and it's not what I want for them. And that's such a message of hope that can change.
Julie, one more thing about that. The prayer thing too, we make it too hard. God, I don't believe, cares how eloquent our prayers are. It could be just as simple as, Lord God, thank you for the gift of my wife in Jesus' name. That's and just thanking God for your gift. Or how can I be a better husband? Or how can I be a better wife? Can you please help me in that, Lord? Just something simple like that to start anyway.
Right. I think that's beautiful. Kathy, what do you say to the listener who says, I'm so happy for them that things came out the other side, and now they have 41 years of stories, both hard ones and really beautiful ones to tell. But that's not going to be my situation. I can't get my spouse on board, or my spouse has decided they're out. What do you say to that person who is going to have a different outcome to their story than what y'all did?
Well, first off, I want to say that you don't have to have a different outcome unless you've already got the different outcome. So if you're still in a marriage and you're thinking it's going to go the other way, there's always hope. God redeemed our marriage. He can redeem any marriage. And it's really it's a matter of surrendering your life to Christ. If you're going to surrender to Christ, he can heal a marriage. He truly can heal a marriage. And as people, if they get our book and read it, they're going to see, we just touched on a few things, but there was a ton of really hard things. And that's why we wrote the book, so people could have hope. Now, if your marriage has dissolved and you're divorced and you're on with a different marriage, then that's where you are right now. And that's where that's where you can work from. So I don't think, I thank God that our marriage, it didn't go the other way. I thank God that we stayed in it, and we just celebrated 42 years. And I can tell you at the 21-year mark, I will never forget, Tim was so excited in telling everyone, we were married 21 years, and in my heart, and I remember even saying to Tim, I was like, big deal. Who cares if we're married 21 years? We're in a really bad marriage. So it didn't even matter to me. So I can tell you, if you're there and you feel like you got a lot of years in there and it's a bad marriage, it can change. It can change today. It can start changing. And the thing that it is going to make it change is Christ. And that is the only lasting thing that's going to keep it changed. And that's why Tim and I we have those non-negotiables. Like Tim said, we're in God's Word every day. We have to be in His Word every day so we can, if we want to grow and we want to change and you want to have a thriving life and a thriving marriage, it's going to come from Him. And we truly believe that.
I think that can bring such hope, and the acknowledgement that where you are today, however you got there, whether the marriage has ended or whether there is still a tiny sliver of light coming under the door, whatever the situation is, to still have God in the middle of it, to still be doing those daily disciplines, those things that connect you to Him, because whatever comes on the other side then will at least have the foundation of Him as that cornerstone. So I just appreciate you so much. Well, tell the listener where that they can find the book, Sex on the First Date. And Tim and Kathy, are you on the socials? Where can we go to find more information and great inspiration from you?
Yes. So you can find our book. So it's Sex on the First Date, a story of a broken beginning to a radically transformed marriage. And you can get it on Amazon or Simon & Schuster. And we are on social, on Instagram, War Room Ministries, and we are on Facebook, War Room Ministries. And our website is warroomministries.com. And that's where you can get a hold of us for us to do marriage events and find out all the information about us.
Fantastic. And Rebecca will get that in the show notes because she puts all that good information there. So listener, make sure you go there and you can find links to all of this. Tim and Kathy, what a fascinating conversation. I feel like we could keep going and going. I really appreciate you making the time and for being so honest about your story, that you're not holding up there this romanticized version of what things, often how we want to hear these stories told. And yet you have an even better, I think, fairy tale ending. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks. All right, listener, you've got your marching orders. Go check out all the great places where you can connect with Tim and Kathy for more information on what they did for a marriage that was really, really in the ditch and how God brought them from that and what they've learned from it. Also, check out All Mom Does. All Mom Does all the places, allmomdoes.com and on the socials. And I love to hear from you too. Julie Lyles Carr, usually on Instagram is where I like to hang out. And I'll see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.